So the latest Munitorum Field Manual has arrived with a few tweaks and FAQs, but the main focus is of course the points. And it is worth noting right here, they did say in the article there is another update coming alongside an actual balanced data slate later on this year. So presumably in December, I would imagine, where they will be looking to fix a few more things on the actual rules side of things. But this field manual was mainly just a way to touch up a few points and bring some balance that way. And I would say that overall, for most armies, it was a bit of a light touch. And we will be covering a few of the bigger changes in a few upcoming videos, things like the orcs, which did get a lot of drops. But in today's video, I wanted to take a quick look at the Dark Angels because they are, of course, my chapter and the few adjustments that they got. And in terms of the good news, we did get a few drops, first of which is some for the Ravenwing units, which weren't seeing much play at the moment, and they definitely could use the help. The leader of the Ravenwing, Samael, got a nice drop down to 115 points from 130, which is definitely going to be a help if you want him running around with some Black Knights and giving them advance and charge, for instance. It means you can essentially take him now and then spend those 15 points on something like a cheeky enhancement. And at 115 points, he can do a decent amount. For that, he's got 6 strength, 6 attacks, which have sustained hits 2 and 2 damage. So he is a fairly solid threat into enemy marine profiles. What probably sees a more significant buff though is the Ravenwing command squad. This was already pretty much an auto take as an HQ choice if you were running Ravenwing or the Company of Hunters detachment, and they have got a drop down from 130 points to 120. So it's only 10 points, but for a fairly chunky unit with 12 toughness 5 wounds and a 5-up invuln that can revive models in a unit that they join thanks to their apothecary, they can definitely earn their points back that bit more easily now, which is a very welcome addition. I think they are definitely a reasonably solid pick now if you are running Ravenwing. Putting them with a unit of Black Knights or even Outriders will add a lot to that unit's durability, as well as giving them some much needed melee punch thanks to the champion who comes with his power weapon. Elsewhere on the Ravenwing side of things, the much maligned Land Speed Avengers dropped from 140 down to 120, so a fairly nice saving of 20 points compared to before, but let's be honest, it's still not enough. Even at 120 points, firing D6 plus 1, strength 8, minus 2 AP, 1 damage shots is just pitiful. And even overcharged, it is still that painful damage too, which just doesn't feel enough in 10th edition with the amount of sort of minus damage and just the durability of everything that is out there. It is still just really quite rubbish. I would say overall, for the rules and the stat line that the Vengeance has, I would say it's barely worth 100 points, let alone 120. And would I maybe pay 120 if it was base damage 2 and then overcharged up to 3? Maybe that would make it a bit more worthwhile, but I think as it is, even with this 20-point drop, it is still going to be sitting on your shelf and seeing no play whatsoever. It's also worth mentioning here, although we will cover them in a separate video, there was an indirect buff to the Ravenwing as well, because a few things in the main Marine Codex also got a drop. The Invader ATV and the Storm Speeders caught a fairly nice drop in points. The ATV has gone down to 60 points from 70, saving you another 10 points, and what that means is that a command squad, a Ravenwing command squad, in a full unit of Outriders with an ATV now just costs you 340 points instead of 360, which may not seem huge, but as I mentioned earlier, could just net you a cheeky enhancement for an HQ. The Storm Speeders have had a bit more of a buff. The Storm Speeder Hailstrike has dropped 15 points down to 115. The Thunderstrike has only gone down 10 to 150, but it is still very, very good. And then the Hammer Strike, this drops a whopping 25 points, going down to 125 instead of 150. Now, yes, the Thunderstrike with its weapons and loadout is still the best overall, I think, even though it is the most expensive still. But if you want some scary strength 9 shooting for, say, some light anti-vehicle work, the Hammer Strike is a much more reasonable pick now, I think. It gets you 6 strength 9 shots, all with either D3 or D6 damage, and 3 of them with Melter as well. And then of course the added bonus of giving essentially the rest of your army ignore cover against the target unit it's shot at is just an even nicer cherry on top with the amount of cover in the game. So it's definitely worth considering now at that 125 point price tag, and I've got 2 of them on my shelf that will definitely be coming out for a few games soon just to test them out. Elsewhere, back to the Dark Angel specifically, the Primarch himself got a very welcome drop. He went down to 285 points instead of the 300 he was before. This is quite significant considering he was already on the edge of being competitive and definitely already saw some fringe play in some games. So 15 points off his cost definitely pushes him into the well worth a try box now. He does have a very solid defensive and offensive profile. He is just a very good data sheet. It was just he was always a bit too pricey before. And whilst, yes, I do think he is good now, although I would personally maybe like to see him at 275 instead of 285 just to really push him into the competitive bracket. But I think personally, if it was me, I would rather increase his cost, bump him back up to say 350 points, and give him a worthwhile buff. Give him back that -1 to be wounded from his shield and the 2 damage sweep profile. I would much prefer he was pricier but worth it rather than just cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So whilst I think he is good at 285 and he definitely will see the board a lot more, it's not really the direction I want them to take him. I want him to be pricey but good. So overall, we do get some very welcome buffs, and you will very likely, especially if you are running Ravenwing, be saving potentially 50 or 60 points on your list, depending on what you are bringing. And we can, of course, now much more viably bring the Lion, but we did also catch some nerfs. First up is a very long overdue one, to be honest. Azrael got an increase. It's not huge, but he has jumped from 105 points to 115. This is largely irrelevant. He's still absolutely brilliant. He was practically an auto take before. In fact, not even practically. He was just flat out an auto take before, and he still is at 115. He just brings so many buffs, some bonus command points, some solid melee, some good, buffs to your army and to his unit, and some decent shooting all by himself. He is still just going to appear in pretty much every Dark Angel list. So even that increase to 115, you won't even notice it. You will just find those 10 points somewhere else, and you will find a way to keep Azrael in. The other nerf was to the Deathwing Knights, which caught a slightly bigger increase of 15 points per 5. So they've gone from 235 points up to 250. This makes them 50 points per model. But when you consider they are a toughness 5 4 wound model with a 2-up save, 4-up invuln, and -1 damage, and actually have some fairly solid melee again thanks to the changes that have happened since the codex dropped to their weapons, they are still very, very, very good. And whilst maybe spamming 3 units of 5 might not happen all the time anymore, as that is now going to be setting you back 750 points instead of 705, I can personally still see it happening, and I certainly think bringing at least 2 units to act as midfield bullies or just hold objectives and dare the enemy to try and charge them, they are still very much worth taking. They are all round solid and one of the most durable units for their cost in the game still, even at 250 points, so you definitely will still see them around. Overall, I think the Dark Angels came out of this field manual pretty damn well. There are a few other changes, like some big hits to the Gladius Strike Force detachment and the Apothecary and Eradicator combo that now cost a lot more and are a bit harder to use. But that will affect every Marine chapter. It's not just a Dark Angel specific thing. At the end of the day, the Gladius is still very, very strong. It will probably still be the go-to detachment for Dark Angels, and most of our good stuff, even if it did get a slight bump like Azrael and the Deathwing Knights, they are still good enough that you are going to want to bring them. And things like the Inner Circle companions got out like bandits with this, because they could have probably done with maybe a slight increase, not a huge one, but I think they were lucky not to get touched by GW, so they've got an inadvertent buff by being left alone. If you want to run Dark Angels, and if you still want to run Azrael and Deathwing Knights, which you do, you will maybe just give up an enhancement or a small chaff unit to fit them in, but you will definitely still be including them. You won't be dropping them from your lists anytime soon, and you can now get the Lion in if you want him that little bit easier too. And in terms of options as well, if you did want to try out the Ravenwing side of things, either in the Company of Hunters or the Stormlance Task Force, that is a bit easier to do now, with not only the drops to the command squad, but also things like the ATV and the Storm Speeders being a little bit more attractive to bring now. So that is, I'm not going to say it's competitive or super top table viable, but it's certainly going to be a bit easier to bring that and do a little bit better in your games just by having, you know, extra 50, 60, 70 points, depending on what you are taking in your list. And that is it for the Dark Angels. As I said, we will be doing some other videos covering some of the other changes for other armies, but what do you make of the changes for the Sons of the Lion in this field manual? And also, how has it affected your army list specifically? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.